Hi, and welcome back to my channel. Some of you may have already noticed that I took a little break from YouTube, but I'm back with another interesting case regarding a YouTube family channel called 8 Passengers. Some of you may have already heard about the channel, and for those of you who've never heard about 8 Passengers, it basically was a family vlogging channel which turned very problematic rather quickly. The trigger warnings for today's case are manipulation, torture, and a lot of abuse on minors. So without any further ado, let's get on to the video. Franke was born on the 18th of January in 1982 in Utah to her mother Jennifer and her father Chad, who would go on to have a total of 5 children by the names of Ruby, Bo, Bonnie, Julie and Ellie, with Ruby being the oldest one. Now, as far as Ruby's childhood is concerned, it's said that she had a very close relationship with all of her siblings as well as her parents, and that Jennifer and Chad would spoil their kids and that they would get them everything that they would ask for. The family was also part of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and as the story goes on, their belief in religion was always a huge part in the family life. So to the outside world it seemed like a nice big family, but later on Ruby's siblings would say that Ruby was very entitled. Even as a child, that Ruby tried to boss her younger siblings around and that she pretty much refused to share any of her personal belongings, including tampons and stuff. Another characteristic of Ruby was that she was very insecure and strived to be the best in everything that she did in order to try and hide her insecurities. And because she was extremely competitive, Ruby didn't really have any friends because the other kids just didn't want to be around her. So that's pretty much it about her childhood. Nothing really all too special, so we'll just skip forward in time to where Ruby has now entered in her teenage years. Because around that time she had set herself one goal that she wanted to achieve under any circumstances, and that was to find herself a successful and rich husband. Once Ruby turned 18 and started college, she was still determined to accomplish her goal. So basically she just entered college but didn't really care about her education as much as trying to find a perfect husband. And conveniently, that's when she met a man called Franke at the beginning of college, and it's said that it was love at first sight. Well, at least for Kevin it was, because Ruby didn't necessarily wanted love, she just wanted marriage. She was so determined that she even made a checklist on what her future husband needed to have. And apparently Kevin found out about that list somehow, so one day he went to her room when Ruby obviously wasn't there. And her roommate actually showed Kevin said list. So now that he knew exactly what Ruby wanted, he became the perfect boyfriend for her. And Kevin's plan worked out pretty well because the two of them got into a serious relationship rather quickly. They introduced one another to the parents, and just weeks after meeting the parents of Kevin, Ruby and Kevin actually gotten engaged and married soon after. So now that Kevin and Ruby had gotten married, Ruby actually dropped out of college, while Kevin went back to get his degree in civil engineering. And just 18 months into the relationship, Ruby had actually fallen pregnant. And on the 3rd of May in 2003, Ruby and Kevin welcomed the first daughter, Cher, to the world. And Cher was one of many children that the family would go on to have. Ruby gave birth almost every other year, and I hope that I have the correct date. So we have Chad in February of 2005, Abby in April of 2007, Julie in January of 2009, Russell in July of 2011, and Evie in September of 2013. So Ruby and Kevin have a total of 6 children, and after Kevin graduated from college at around 2013, the family moved into the new home, and that's when Ruby first got the idea to record herself and the family for the first time. And around January in 2015, the YouTube channel called 8 Passengers was born. The very first video was called The Making of Eve, and it basically shows a gender reveal party where Ruby is cutting into a cake. At first it was just random videos showing the life of Ruby and her family. And at the time around 2015 is kind of when a lot of people were really into family vlogs. So Ruby started to grow a small amount of followers. And once Ruby realized that her channel was starting to grow, she now had a new goal in life. So she started to post every Monday to Friday, I believe, vlogs about her life, about her children's lives. Ruby started to record and also post everything concerning their life. She would give relationship advice, cooking recipes. She would even take her camera to doctor's appointments and also record very private conversations with her children. And within a year, at the beginning of 2016, Ruby managed to get a total of 30,000 subscribers, which was a very strong number at the time. But the growth was just starting out because by 2017, the 8 Passengers Challenge grew from 30,000 to 1 million subscribers. At the peak of her channel, she had a total of 2.5 million subscribers, so the channel was becoming very well known, to where some videos had around 10 million views. The family was also getting a lot of money from YouTube AdSense alone, and with that there were also a lot of sponsoring coming around, where Ruby would now start to promote Kellogg's, Walgreens and many more. But unfortunately, Ruby was just one of those people that just didn't know how to handle fame very well. She let the success get to her head, and one thing that Ruby refused to acknowledge was that not only was her channel very popular, but it was also very dramatic and very concerning when you watched it. And one of many concerning things regarding this channel was Ruby's parenting style. She was a very strict parent, but she was also a sadist, because what she did to these kids had nothing to do with parenting or discipline. It was just a dominance of power. One example was that a teacher of Evie, so her youngest daughter, sent her a text telling Ruby that Evie had forgotten her lunch and asking if she could bring it over. And just a quick reminder, Evie at this point is 5 years old. So technically in school she's in kindergarten, and upon receiving the message from the teacher, Ruby picks up her camera and goes on to rant about how irresponsible her 5-year-old daughter is, and that she is responsible for her own lunch, and it's basically her fault that she doesn't have anything to eat now. And get this, it gets way worse. Ruby, while filming, goes on to say that no, she won't bring her any food over, and that she hopes that her other classmates refuse to share their food with Evie so that she can learn her lesson. Evie is 5 years old, and this clip went viral. People were dumbfounded that a mother was capable of such neglect. But instead of taking a step back and maybe reflecting, Ruby goes on to defend her actions. And she would also film her children in the most uncomfortable situations, where you can clearly see that the kids do not want to be on camera and that they don't want to have every detail of their life on the internet forever. There is even one clip where the children say that they don't have any friends, and Ruby just, kind of laughs it off. And the more fame that came, the more Ruby seemed to be escalating. She would refuse to give her children food unless everything was done around the house. She would take away all the electronics to isolate her kids even more. And there was yet another incident where the people were just outraged. So Evie, who again is just 5 years old, is responsible to wake herself up, and one day Evie just slept in. But Ruby, instead of being the mother, waking her up, taking her to kindergarten, no, she picked up her camera to embarrass her daughter because she didn't wake up on time. Ruby goes on to say that she didn't wake Evie up because every time that she would wake her up, Evie would be so grumpy. So as a punishment, she would now miss out on a whole day of education. And Ruby, I seriously don't know what her problem is. Well, I mean, she is mistreating all of her children, but there was another incident regarding Evie where she left her ski coat at school. And they had winter break or whatever, and because Evie now didn't have her ski coat, she was left at home while her entire family went to the planned ski trip. And this just continues on. Ruby continues to vlog those incidents, and I'm only thinking if that's what she put online. I don't even want to imagine what went on in this family that we haven't seen. But as controversial as this channel had become, the more well-known it was also becoming, because by now Ruby's face was everywhere. People talked about the 8 Passengers channel, people talked about Ruby, and in the end that's exactly what she wanted. More attention. Her controversial videos were even broadcasted on the news. And what is also worth mentioning is that Ruby does have 3 sisters, like I've mentioned, and all of them were into the YouTube business as well. Even her brother and her parents, I believe, as well. So the whole family is on YouTube and very successful on top of it. So we'll skip time once again to 2020, at which point the channel kind of got cancelled. So what happened was that Ruby was yet again vlogging, and her son Chad, who was 14 years old at the time, he mentioned that his parents put him into a 10-week wilderness camp, which is designed for troubled teens to get them back on the right path. Now, I don't know what Chad did or why he was put into this camp. But yeah, Ruby and Chad are sitting, and Ruby talks about responsibility and that her kids need to learn because she doesn't hesitate to punish her kids. And that's when Chad admits that as a form of punishment, his whole bedroom was taken away from him for 7 months. First of all, how do you take a whole freaking room away? And you're probably wondering, well, what could Chad have possibly done for Ruby to take away his whole bloody bedroom? According to Ruby, he played a few pranks. Yeah, he played a few pranks, and that's basically why his whole bedroom was taken away. So Chad had woken up his younger brother Russell one day up at around 2 o'clock in the morning, and told him that the family was heading off to Disneyland. So he got all packed up, excited, and that's why Chad lost his bedroom and was forced to sleep on a beanbag for 7 months. So once the backlash started to happen, Ruby just took the video down, but by the time a lot of people have already seen it. And a lot of people were talking about it, and with that sponsorships were also starting to break away from Ruby. And what does Ruby do? Well, of course she did not apologize or even acknowledge that she did something wrong. Instead, she hired a lawyer that sent out legal letters to any YouTuber that would talk about the 8 Passenger channel. There was even a petition created for CPS to finally start an investigation on this family, which had 16,000 signatures. And random people even started to call up CPS demanding that they go over and take a look. So finally, by the summer of 2020, CPS did pay a visit to the Franke family. But of course, Ruby by the time was expecting them. So she put on her best acting skills to the test, portraying this wonderful, caring, nurturing parent, to the point where the CPS workers asked Ruby and Kevin for parenting advice. But because nothing was done about the abuse, Ruby just continued on with her ways, and by January of 2022, she decided to stop posting videos on YouTube. As for her reason why she left her vlogging days behind her, She said that she wanted to save her children from the outside world and that her family was getting attacked by random people on the internet and that she just didn't want any more harm for her family. Also around the time when she abandoned the 8-passenger channel, Ruby Franke would meet a woman called Jody Hildebrand. And those two women would cause even more agony than anyone could imagine. But first, who is this Jody person? Well, Jody Hildebrand was born on the 15th of June in 1969 in Salt Lake City, Utah. And she was also part of the LDS Mormon Church. According to Jody, her parents were also neglectful. They just didn't really care that much, and also apparently once Jody turned 2 years old, until she was about 5 years old, she was sexually abused by a 15-year-old boy. After graduating from school, she went on to study English literature and even managed to get a master's degree in psychology. And at around 2005, she became a licensed therapist. Around 2012, Jody started her own business, which she called Connections with an X. But this business of Jody's didn't help the people. In fact, she actually ruined a lot of lives. So what is Connections? Jody said that it was life coaching service of healing, which psychotherapy could not offer. Apparently, if you became a member of Jody, your focus would be to turn your pain into joy, confusion into clarity. But Jody did nothing that she claimed. Instead, she was teaching and manipulating people into hating themselves and their spouse. And on top of that, she charged over $180 just to ruin your life. Jody would constantly say things like children were evil and that the children of these people who approached her for her help were just manipulating and controlling. She even went as far as to tell those parents that they should stop loving the children because that would be a sign of weakness. Jody almost, well, you can say that she developed a catchphrase where she would say regarding any and all problems that these people only had the problem because they weren't living in truth. Whatever that's supposed to mean. Her whole therapy session was to make you feel as guilty as she could, to make you hate yourself, and unfortunately, she succeeded with a lot of her customers, which resulted in a lot of her customers getting divorced because Jody just wasn't helping at all. She was just adding fuel to the fire. And her tactics were more than just problematic because let's say a couple went to her because they may have communication issues or maybe they can figure out other small things in their marriage. Jody by the end would convince both parts that the husband was to blame for everything, that the husband was cheating, lying, and she would scare the wives so much so that she actually made them believe that they needed to be scared for their life because their husbands were that dangerous. And one more thing that Jody liked to add, that every man who came to her had a porn addiction. Well, she would find an addiction in everything, whether it was foods, coffee, your phone, TV. But regarding porn, according to her, every male client had this addiction, including teenage boys. She would also host these group sessions for addiction where she convinced plenty of men to sit around in a circle, including underage boys, and they would talk about their porn addiction, which the majority of them didn't even have. And people were just starting to write reviews just to warn people like, please don't go to Jody because sooner or later she will ruin your life. She definitely isn't interested in helping you whatsoever. Jody actually even made a video begging people to give her a 5-star review because of the fact that her ratings were all going downhill. And she even said that Google was the stupidest thing she's ever seen because it's used to manipulate and sabotage people's life. She definitely didn't get the irony in that one. But even with the bad reviews, she still managed to convince couples that she could help them. And so that's how she eventually met Ruby Franke. At first, Ruby needed help regarding her son Chad. she thought that her son needed some therapy, some guidance. So that's when she hired Jody Hildebrand. And because, well, according to Ruby, it was going so great with Chad, she also hired Jody to help her out with her marriage issues. But of course, Jody did not help them whatsoever. She just continued to add fuel to the fire. She would tell the couple that Kevin was addicted to his phone, his work, and I can only assume that she also convinced Kevin that he had a porn addiction. Kevin was attending a group session where he talked about all of his addictions, and by what I have seen, it kind of looks like he just repeats whatever Jody wants him to say. The whole thing just really gives off the vibe that the men have really been brainwashed by this woman to the point where they really believe that something is seriously wrong with them. And this actually resulted in Ruby and Kevin getting a divorce. But this didn't even seem to bother Ruby at all. She only cared about joining and working for connections. So now Ruby changed her 8-passenger YouTube name to Moms of Truth. And because she still had so many followers, this was perfect opportunity to promote their business. And since Ruby and Jody have now joined forces, this would result in a terrible living situation for Ruby's 2 youngest children, Russell and Evie. Sherry and Chad, by 2022, weren't living with Ruby anymore. Julia and Abby, who were 15 and 14 years old, did still live with their mother, and so did Russell and Evie, who must have been around 11 and 9 years old. At one point, Russell and Evie were pulled out from school so that they would clean the floorboard. And get this, during one Christmas, Russell and Evie were told that because they had been so selfish throughout the year, Santa wouldn't come to visit them. So at 10 and maybe 8 years old, both the kids had to sit and watch everyone else getting presents and opening them while they didn't get a single thing. And by 2023, Ruby really cut off any and all contact with her family and friends. She also wouldn't allow her children to see their relatives, and Ruby kind of developed an obsession regarding Jody. Whatever Jody would say, Ruby would just go along with it. So much so that Ruby pulled all of her 4 younger children from school so that the children were stuck with Ruby and Jody. Now, I don't know how the next part came to be, but eventually Jody convinced Ruby that it would be a great idea that Russell and Evie would live with Jody. This was apparently necessary for the 2 youngest kids to fix their attitude. So around May 2023, Russell and Evie moved in with Jody. And from that moment forward, the next 3 months were just pure torture for those poor children. Both Russell and Evie had to stand for hours on end on hot concrete floor outside of the house with no shoes or socks on, which obviously caused them severe burns on their feet. They weren't allowed to eat anything, and if Jody did feed them, it was barely enough to keep the children alive. Jody would also deprive Russell and Evie from water, and because these kids just couldn't continue on to work outside since they were starving and dehydrated, Jody would punish them with extreme physical exercise. Jody also took everything from them, whether it was books, food, or even their beds. Yeah, apparently this is a pattern because in order to save Russell and Evie, since they were being so selfish, the children had to sleep on the floor, and as another punishment, Jody would also lock them in a dark room, basically isolating them as much as possible. Jody would also lock the children in this dark room if someone was coming over, visiting her, so basically no one even knew that Russell and Evie were living with Jody. And as for Ruby, well, she did live with her 2 middle children, Abby and Julie, and she would come over to also keep an eye on her youngest children. But she was very aware what kind of abuse they are going through. But instead of stopping it, Ruby would just encourage it. So yeah, the abuse continues to get worse and worse as the day passes, and in July of 2023 is where Russell tried to escape for the first time. But unfortunately, Jody caught him and his punishments became even more extreme. Jody has now realized that she needed to keep an eye on Russell, and more importantly that she needed to tire him out and scare him to the point where he wouldn't try to escape again. Jody would even tie Russell to his hands and knees to ensure that he wouldn't try anything. Russell suffered severe wounds from being tied up, and so Ruby and Jody would use K, pepper and honey in order to try and treat them. And Ruby by the time had also started to physically abuse her son. She started to kick him and she would even waterboard him, doing everything possible to scare Russell enough to not try a stunt like that ever again. But neither Ruby nor Jody managed to break Russell, and so the brave boy tried his second escape attempt on the 30th of August in 2023. One day Ruby and Jody weren't at home. I'm not sure where they went, but since they weren't at home, Russell was once again locked in the stock room, and somehow he still managed to have enough strength to break free and ran over to the nearest neighborhood, knocking on the door. And once this neighbor opened the door and saw this abused boy, Russell, who is very well mannered, asked the neighbor nicely if he could call 911 for him and his sister. And once the police was informed, they rushed over to Jody's house to rescue Evie. And Evie was in a similar state as Russell was. So by now there were no doubt that this was a clear case of child abuse and neglect. Evie and Russell were transported to a hospital, and once Jody arrived back home, she was immediately arrested. After Jody's arrest and finding more than enough evidence in her house, Ruby Franke was arrested on the 21st of August in 2023 and charged with child abuse. And Ruby at first tried to put the whole blame on Jody, claiming that she was brainwashed by her and that it was all Jody's idea. But of course no one believed her. By December of 2023, both Ruby Franke and Jody Hildebrand pled guilty of all 4 charges of child abuse. And on the 20th of February in 2024, both women were sentenced. And Ruby really tried her hardest to convince the jury that she was innocent and basically put the whole blame on Jody, saying that she had manipulated her. And Ruby also said, and I quote, "For the past 4 years I have chosen to follow counsel and guidance that has led me into a dark delusion. To me, to demonstrate my remorse and regret without blame, I take full accountability for my choices, and it is my preference that I serve a prison sentence." As for Jody, she showed no remorse whatsoever. She even went on to say that she didn't do anything wrong. And as for their sentence, both women were found guilty and sentenced between 1 and 15 years. And that was only for 1 count of child abuse, and they were charged with 4 counts. So apparently in Utah you don't get a specific amount of year that you need to serve, but every sentence needs to be served consecutively. So that basically means that Ruby and Jody will either serve 4 years minimum or up to 60 years maximum. And a parole board will decide how long Ruby and Jody will serve for each charge. So yeah, that's it for today's case. A very, very frustrating one, because there were so many signs and nothing was done to prevent further damage. But thankfully the children now have a chance to recover and hopefully get the needed help for the past years of trauma. I hope you've all enjoyed the video, and as always, let me know which case you would like to see me cover next. I hope I see you all in my next video. Bye!